How much do you think can happen in a minute, in 60 seconds? That's not very much time. In fact, it might take you a minute to think about all of this. In that 1 minute that it takes you to think of stuff, $400 million of goods will be sold on Alibaba. 439,000 page views on Wikipedia. 194,000 apps would have been downloaded from the Google Play Store and the Apple Store. 31,700 hours of music would have been played on Pandora. 38,000 photographs would have been uploaded to Instagram. 4.1 million searches would have been made on Google across the world. 139,000 hours of video would have been watched on YouTube. And 10 million ads would have been displayed on any property all over the world. And as for Facebook, it would have had 3.3 million shares. This is what happened in a minute. This is what happened in the minute that it took to explain what happens in a minute. Kind of mind-boggling, isn't it? All of this just happened in the last minute that went by. This wasn't an ordinary minute. It was in fact one internet minute. And each of these activities have something in common, because each of these activities generates data. So what is this data that these activities generate? Let's look at a few samples. We'll start off by considering the $400 million worth of sales on Alibaba. So if you sell a product, customers do a whole bunch of things. They come to your website and they view the products. They place an order, they might rate their experience, or they might write a review. All of this is data. Let's consider the 4.1 million searches on Google. What kind of data does that generate? Google improves its search results by seeing what you click, which means you have to have the results returned. What results did the user actually view? Did he go to the next page? And what result did he finally click on? All of this is data that's interesting to Google. What about the 10 million ads that were displayed in the last minute? Ad data is basically ad impressions, that is when you see an ad, or ads clicked, when you actually click on an ad, you performed an action. All of these companies, Alibaba, Wikipedia, Google, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Pandora, all of these companies are constantly collecting and holding data. Now, how much data do you think they collect? What is the order of magnitude of the data that they collect? It's petabytes of data every minute. Now, petabyte is just a word for someone who hasn't dealt with data. So let's try to imagine petabytes of data. What does this mean to collect petabytes of data? So firstly, 1 petabyte is roughly equal to 1,000 terabytes. That doesn't make much sense. 1 terabyte is typically the size of the hard disk that you buy. So this is a 1 terabyte hard disk drive that you see on screen right in front of you. You've seen this. You've probably used it to back up all the stuff that's on your computer. Now imagine 1,000 such drives, right? Thousands of such 1 terabyte drives are filled up every minute by data collected on the web. That is the magnitude of data. This is how you should imagine the data that's collected on the web. Let's go back to our original question. Why are web companies collecting literally truckloads of data? The answer is very simple. The very first reason for collecting this truckloads of information is because they can. And it's not just because they can, it's because they can afford it. This is because storage of data, the amount of money it takes to store data, has dropped precipitously. It's dropped like crazy over the last 2 decades. If you imagine back in 91, let's take a look at this graph. This basically is a graph which represents how storage prices have fallen. So this is the price per gigabyte of hard disk space. On the y-axis is the number of gigabytes of data, and on the x-axis is basically years. So back in 91, 1 gigabyte cost over $3,000. That's how much 1 gigabyte of space cost. Now, if you think about recently, let's consider 2015, 2016, 1 gigabyte cost just 3 cents, less than 3 cents in 2015. That's how much the drop has been, which is why we can afford to collect this data. That was reason 1. Let's look at reason 2. The reason why these companies collect this data is because they can monetize it. It's not for fun that they're collecting data. Large-scale data can be processed to derive huge amounts of information. And it is this value that they derive from data that leads them to collect it. If you think about things out in the world nowadays, everything is personalized. If you think about product recommendations on Amazon, it's as though it knows you. Your newsfeed on Facebook knows you. Your homepage on Netflix knows you. There are ads, offers, and promotions just for you. And how do they know you? By crunching data. Really cool products which make a whole lot of money is built using this data. For example, Google Maps. All the location data, satellite data is huge amounts of data. Such a cool product. Apple's Siri. It needs to process all this voice data to be able to understand you. In fact, other companies pay these big companies to mine the data. For example, Twitter Firehose or Facebook topic data is a way for Facebook and Twitter to monetize the data that they have within them. You use Twitter, someone uses Twitter Firehose to extract sentiments from your tweets. Twitter Firehose makes money for Twitter. In short, data is money. And the question is, how do we get from truckloads of data? Imagine the truckload that you saw earlier. How do we go from here to making boatloads of money? Basically to monetizable products, recommendations, maps, newsfeed, etc. There is a transition that's available. There is a method which is followed, and there are tools which are used. Companies, like the ones we mentioned earlier, own huge data centers. And that is where this data lives. And by huge data centers, it basically means they cover hundreds of acres. This is how a data center looks. This is an aerial shot of a data center. This is where the data they collect is stored. This data center has millions of servers. Inside the data center, it looks like this futuristic science fiction movie. And this is where the data is stored, and this is where it's processed. These data centers run sophisticated proprietary software which allows them to munge the data and extract useful information from it. You need the software to process the terabytes and petabytes of data that are being generated every minute. Remember, this is every minute. And this huge data centers with lots of servers running sophisticated proprietary software to produce terabytes or petabytes of data. This sums up to be the big data paradigm. So you always talk about big data or hear big data being mentioned. This is what it refers to. Now, I've spent a lot of time going over And mentioning all these huge companies, Google, Amazon, Apple, there are only a few companies in the world that have terabytes and petabytes of data and lots of servers and sophisticated proprietary software. So, why should we even care? Let them worry about it, and they're doing a good job. So, why do we care about these terabytes and petabytes of data? The fact is, even a small organization which just have a few orders or visits per day, they collect terabytes of data over their lifetime. And processing this data, even very small shops need to worry about it, and even they need to use big data technologies. So it's not just restricted to the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, it applies to small and medium businesses as well. So if you think about cool new technologies like self-driving cars, Internet of Things, they'll use sensors that generate huge amounts of data. Big data refers to the use of lots of servers. I don't have that many servers, why do I care? You should and can care because cloud companies like AWS, Azure, Google Computing Platform, all of these make available to you hundreds of servers at a moment's notice. In fact, huge companies are built on top of this server, this software. Netflix, Pinterest, Airbnb run their entire business just using cloud services like AWS. They don't own their own data centers. Amazon owns it for them and offers it to them at a moment's notice. Now, sophisticated proprietary software, you can say you don't have them. But that's where open source technologies come in. Hadoop, Spark, HPs, Hive, and many other technologies allow you to work with big data, and these are all open source, which means they're free for you to use. These are highly sophisticated software that anyone can use to process big data. So I've waxed eloquent about all of this. It's pretty obvious by now that this big data is no longer the sole purview of big companies. It applies to you, it applies to everyone, whether they're in a small startup or in a medium-sized business. Basically, 3 major developments is what we saw right now. Terabytes and petabytes of data is not restricted to the Googles and the Amazons of the world. Large-scale data is generated every day, everywhere. As a personal anecdote, Flipkart back in 2011 was processing a few hundred orders a day. Today, it processes 100,000. Physical cloud infrastructure is now highly affordable. So you have access to infrastructure to process the data that your company generates. Open source technology is available to all. So you no longer need to work on Excel sheets which no longer open up all the orders that you process in a day. That's exactly what happened in Flipkart. Processing was done on Excel sheets. When those Excel sheets didn't open up, they moved to an in-memory software called ClickView. When the memory wasn't enough to store their orders, they had to move to big data technologies. The big data paradigm is here. You may be a tiny startup now, processing very little data on Excel sheets. But if you're successful and you grow, the day isn't far away when you need these technologies.